This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here's a turd that I picked up at the flea market yesterday. I first picked it up with spare parts in mind, but I might try to save it. This is a little 4-speed GE kiddie record player, and obviously the lid is broken off. Here's the lid right here. As you can see, it uses one of those cheap plastic hinges, and whatever bonehead came up with this kind of hinge should be taken behind the barn and beaten, because I've never seen one of these types of hinges. It's still in good shape. Every one of them I've ever found was either broken off like this one is, or they was well on their way to being broken off. At least this one does have a metal lid latch on it. The newer ones had a plastic latch that broke just about as easy as the hinge did. So if I fix this, probably what I'll do is just install a couple of regular hinges on the back and be done with it. You can see the plastic is cracked, but at least it's cracked on the back. Nobody will be paying attention to the back anyway. Just to give you a little background, this was a very popular GE kiddie record player. They made a ton of them from the late 60s until about 1975, when GE got out of the record player business. The early versions, which I believe this one is, had 4 speeds. The later versions were only 2-speed. And like I said before, the later ones had the plastic latch on the lid instead of a metal one. And there was also a Mickey Mouse version of this that had a Mickey Mouse themed tone arm. And when GE got out of the record player business in the mid-70s, a company called Interstate Industries picked up the GE record player line and sold them under the Concert Hall brand, as well as a few other brands, store brands mainly. And there was even a version of this record player from the mid to late 70s under the Concert Hall brand name. I plugged this in last night just to see what it would do, and the turntable doesn't spin. You can hear the motor humming, but the platter is very stiff. Doesn't turn as freely as it should, and I'm sure the motor's froze up too. However, I ran my finger across the needle and got a stout noise out of the speaker, so I think the cartridge and needle is okay. Hopefully all we'll need to do is fix the drive mechanism, and hopefully it'll be good to go. Now let's open it up and see what the inside looks like. Okay, I got the platter off, and just as I suspected, this center bearing spindle is very tight. The motor is frozen solid. I can just barely turn it. And the way you get these apart is remove a Phillips head screw here, remove the turntable platter by removing the center clip and lifting off the platter. If the platter doesn't come off very easily, you might have to tap on the spindle with a mallet to break it loose. And once you get the platter off, there's a 1/4-inch bolt here you have to remove, and there's also 1/4-inch bolts that hold the drive assembly in place if you need to take that out. Okay, slight correction. To get this apart, you don't have to remove this screw here. This screw here simply holds this fiber motor board in place, and this tone arm clip is so sorry it might as well not even have one, because the tone arm certainly won't stay on it. I discovered this spacer that you see down in here rolling around in the bottom of the case, so that's what keeps this fiber motor board in place. So in order to get this out, all you have to do is remove the turntable platter and remove 3 screws. One here, one here, one here. This one here remains to hold the drive mechanism somewhat in place. But yeah, GE was the king of cost cutting, and this record player here is no exception. In fact, if you could eliminate one washer or one small screw with GE, then you were considered a major hero. Any other company would have had screws on each corner of the motor board to hold it in the cabinet, plus additional screws, bolts, or rivets to hold the mechanism in place, but GE was ingenious. They come up with a way to mount everything right here. The screws that hold the mechanism in place also hold the motor board and all of that to the cabinet. Okay, I got everything freed up and running. I think this is probably a 66 model. I found a 30th week of 1965 date code on one of the capacitors, so this was probably made for the 66 model year. Alright, let's put it all back together and see if it works. Okay, we're all back together and the platter spins very freely in neutral position, so let's set it to 45 and see what happens. If this adapter will do right, it's wanting to come loose from the platter. Yeah, that's nice. Now let's find a record and see what happens. Okay, let's see what happens.
Okay, now let's get to work. I'm warning you guys.
Well, for a 2-transistor amplifier, it's not too bad. I think it sounds better than a modern-day Crosley, even though it is a cheaply made GE. Here's the record that was on it when I got it, a flexible disc, Sounds of the Space Age, something put out by National Geographic.
Like men climbing one another's shoulders, the Apollo flights of 1969 climbed step by step toward a landing on the moon. In March, Apollo 9 successfully tests the docking procedures. In May, Apollo 10 performs a dramatic dress rehearsal. The landing craft Snoopy drops to within 9 miles of the moon's surface, as Charlie Brown, the command ship, orbits far overhead.
Oh, Houston, this is Snoopy.
Right, Snoop, go ahead.
It's going. We is down among them, Charlie.
Roger, I hear you weaving your way up the freeway. Then crisis. Snoopy begins to tumble as it sheds its descent stage before blasting itself toward a rendezvous with the command ship.
Something went wild there on that staging.
Charlie Brown, Houston, they got staging. They had a wild gyration, though.
Well, I don't know what the hell that was, babe.
Snoop, Houston, you're looking okay for the insertion burn.
Okay, let's try regular LP. And on a bass intensified record, it's skipping like crazy, and it's often the case with these low compliance crystal cartridges. Notice this particular record, it's playing it just fine. Let's try a 78. Okay, let's try it with a 78. Got the needle flipped over to the 78 side. Obviously that needle is bad, so we'll flip it back to the LP side just for testing.
You got a gal you love her Sunday, then you get another for Monday.
Ain't nobody's business but my own. You say you're always home alone. How come?
Well, that would work better with the correct size needle, but I'm really not worried about it. The only thing that saved this record player from getting scrapped is the cartridge was still good, because I certainly wasn't going to invest any money in this. So basically all I had to do was clean and lubricate the motor and clean and lubricate the spindle bearing, as well as use some rubber renew on the idler wheel and clean the motor capstan or shaft, whatever you choose to call it, and the inner rim of the turntable, and it works pretty good for what it is. Later I'll come up with some hinges and reattach that lid some sort of way, and then it'll probably just go on the shelf where it'll sit for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years or more.